We are continuing on here on Fox 5 Weekend Live. I'm Julie Donaldson. We're going to talk a little bit about, since it's Women's History Month, we have to talk about the history of women and how far we've come, and maybe a little bit more about where we need to go as well. Joining me now is Lane Windham. She is a historian at Georgetown University. She is the Associate Director of the Labor Center, and we have everything about the path that women have taken to get where we are today. Lane, I'm so pleased to have you joining us today. Thank you. Okay, Lane, so let's talk a little bit about here, first off, of the challenge that it's been for women and just kind of the progress that we've made over the years of just being able to get further into the workforce and into the labor market as well. Where do you start in your history of this to where we are today?
Sure. Julie, when I think about the 20th century and changes that have happened in our economy, the mass scale entry of women into our economic system, into paid work, is really one of the most important and influential developments, really, of the 20th century. Now, let's be clear. Women have always worked, right? Whether that has been for wages, whether that has been for pay, that is something that has developed over the years. But women have always worked. What we saw in the 20th century is that starting, especially in the 1970s, for the first time, millions of women were entering into the paid workforce. This is, of course, following the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so whereas women had worked for pay before, particularly many unmarried women without children, women of color have been long more likely to work for wages than white women. But what we found is that all women were really entering into the workforce in the 1970s. Now remember, before the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was a really different economy, right? Women could not get credit in their own name. They would have to turn to their husband or family to help them get credit. The want ads and the newspapers would have sections for men's jobs and women's jobs. Women were routinely fired from their jobs as flight attendants or teachers when they got pregnant, and that was completely illegal, right? And so we saw massive changes into the 60s, into the 70s. And what we've seen is that over the years, women's participation in the workforce has just climbed and climbed until today. Women are about nearly half of all the people working for a paycheck today, about 47%. However, women still do not earn equal pay to men. Women still earn about 84% of what men earn. And that's even true when you look at specific jobs. So women doctors make 12% less than male doctors. Women nurses make 8% less than male nurses. Even people at the hotel clerks, the people checking you in at your resort or your hotel, women tend to make 11% less than men, even in those jobs. And so we have a long way to go before we fully reach parity in terms of the way that we are, the paychecks that we earn in the workplace.
I was with an organization where at the time I was the highest ranked female. I was a senior vice president in the room with nothing but men. And that needs to change because women can have jobs, they can have managerial jobs, but they haven't necessarily been in the rooms where they're the decision makers. How far have we come from women being kind of like CEOs or the bosses or leading companies? And even in the last few years, and I guess where's still that disparity and where we need to be in order for it to be fair with the pay, in order to be fair with how many companies that we're leading and running as well?
Absolutely. The most recent statistics are that Uh, Women, only 23% of the
Yeah.
sort of C-suite executives are women. So we have a long way to go, again, before there's parity. Um, there is one development I'd love to talk about that I follow. I'm a historian. I have a focus on labor and organized labor. And what I have noticed is that over the last 7 to 10 years, there has been a marked increase of women running labor unions in this country. In fact, the top three unions in terms of their membership size in this country, it's not the auto workers or the Teamsters or the steel workers. It's actually the NEA, which is the National Education Association, Service Employees Union, and the American Federation of Teachers are the top three unions in terms of membership. All three of those are run by women. When we look at the largest unions in this country, so those that have about 100,000 members or more, over a third of those unions are run by women. And that's an exciting development because often, right, when we think about labor unions, we think about maybe a guy in a hard hat, right? But in fact, women more and more are actually stepping into those leadership roles and helping to steer America's labor movement.
It's also a far cry from, where my mom and the opportunities were provided to her, same as her mom. Back then, you had the opportunity to be a teacher, a nurse, homemaker was considered a big thing as well. And even just going to colleges. For my grandma, you didn't. You got married and that was kind of it. My mom's generation could go to universities. Now we're getting to that point to where women are still getting grounds to being CEOs and executives. How does that also affect maybe like the family dynamic as the women's role in the labor force kind of changes and evolves?
That's a great question. And as you were speaking, I was thinking again about that pay gap. And one of the things that people have studied is the fact that during the period when women are most likely to be raising their families, so the ages between 35 and 44, that's actually when the pay gap is the largest. Because what's often happening in families, is that when a family needs a member to step back to raise the children, women are often making that decision. Now, in the U.S., I've described this whole massive increase of women into the workforce. However, in our country, we have not made sufficient provisions for childcare. Here's an example. When you look at other rich nations, wealthy nations, they spend an average of $14,000 a year public support for toddlers, for children under the age of 5 on daycare and care so that the mother and the parents can work. In the US, we spend $500 total. Right. And so what we have benefited from millions of women entering the workforce. That helps our GDP. It helps our country, our productivity grow. But we have not supported women and we have not supported families in that transition. And that is a policy issue. Now, interestingly, you might remember during COVID, when all the kids were at home, we saw millions of women step back from the workforce because all of a sudden they had to be caregivers at home for the kids who weren't in school, which is just a reminder of how women play that caretaker role.
The daycare, I think that's huge too, right? And the workforce having to be able to accommodate the working mom. One things that we set up is, being able to say you can maybe shift your hours a little bit. So if you need to go to a soccer game or you need to go to pick up your child, you can take that time without having to feel guilty about it and maybe pick up the shift a little bit later once the kids are in bed, as long as the work is getting done. Not all jobs can afford that freedom as well. So then it becomes that daycare on property or making it more affordable role and giving them some resources to be able to have that so they can continue on with their work. I think that's something that a lot of companies really kind of need to step further into. As we're wrapping up here, what more do we want to know and learn about women in the workforce and the labor unions and organized activities with that from your expertise?
Well, Julie, I would suggest that we've talked a little bit here about the major change of the entry of women into the workforce and how that's affected families and society. I will remind us that those changes that happen, right, from women gaining the kinds of rights to have credit, to have access to jobs, to move towards equality in the workforce, those didn't just happen. Those weren't just given to people. There were people who stood up, who demanded those changes, and were part of a movement for change. And so that's important for us to remember. Martin Luther King once wrote, progress doesn't roll in on the wheels of inevitability. And I think that applies here.
So we've come so far, and it's in our care and our job to make it even better for our children and our daughters and the next generation as well. So the opportunities do become much more equal in pay and opportunities and supporting the family dynamic, because we don't want to lose that at all. Mother shouldn't have to feel guilty choosing between her child and her career. There's got to be a way that we can do that together. Thank you so much for your expertise, Lane Windham, again, of Georgetown. We appreciate you joining us here on Fox Weekend Live. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.